This week's literary concepts lesson number 4 is about allegory. To kind of put it simply, an allegory is a story that kind of uses different characters in different settings in order to kind of reveal something that normally we might not talk about, either because it's boring or it's dry, or because it's a little too close to home. So if you think of like trying to reveal how politics are maybe failing, or how morally or socially we're having issues or problems, a good way to do that is to kind of use different characters and put them in a different setting in order to tell that story. And that's really what allegory is and does. So the thing that's tough about this particular lesson is that an allegory isn't something that can be summed up in a sentence or even in a paragraph in a lot of cases. It's something that needs to be a little bit longer. So if the lesson gets long, this is where it's going to get long. To understand allegory, you kind of need to look at some different lessons. So the first one that's kind of mentioned here on this list, Plato kind of made this story about these people who lived in a cave and they were never able to see anything. And again, it's an allegory that kind of shows how ignorance can be damaging, and how if we let ignorance kind of rule over us, we make really bad decisions. Animal Farm is probably one of the most well-known allegories. Essentially, it's about a bunch of animals that live on a farm, and they're a little bit sick of the farmer expecting them to work and to do things, and so they stage an uprising. The pigs kind of start things out, but pretty soon all of the other animals kind of join in, and they overthrow the farm. The allegory here is to kind of look at communism and look at how communism fails. And again, Orwell was writing about, communism in his time, and so this narrative fit really well for a lot of people. Another one that many of you may be familiar with is actually The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And you can look at some of the characters and kind of draw the connections right away. So in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you have the lion, Aslan, who in the story at one point dies and then rises from the dead. At the same time, you have a witch who, again, is kind of the epitome of evil. She does everything in her power to kind of ruin the world around her. And she conspires with the children that come into this world. She conspires with one of the children to kind of betray Aslan, the lion. That betrayal by the character Edmund, or Edward, is to be kind of compared to the story of Christ. So the lion actually represents Christ, the witch represents Satan, and Edmund, the boy that kind of comes into the story, is corrupted by the devil to betray the lion. So these are kind of pretty good examples of how we see allegory kind of working and making that connection between one story and another story or another idea that we're really familiar with. So the big question is, why do we bother with allegory? So the big things are kind of mentioned there, that they add different layers of meaning to the work. But then the other thing that's kind of, I think, maybe the more important part is that they tend to be a little bit more engaging. Nobody wants to read about communist revolutions and how they fail, but it's a little, you can kind of make it a little bit kiddie and a little bit more accessible if you write about farm animals. That's something that everybody can kind of get into. And then sure enough, by the end of the thing, you've been tricked into believing that, look, communism can't work. Like, it fails. The people in power eventually end up corrupted in the end. So allegory allows writers to kind of put their moral and political points of view into play without being too terribly preachy. Like I said, in a way it kind of lets them trick the reader. So when we study allegory, it can give us insight into the writer's mind and kind of see the world through their eyes. And that's really what allegory tries to do. It kind of falls in the same category as science fiction and fantasy. It allows us to kind of tackle tougher ideas without, using real life scenarios and real life situations. But that's allegory in a nutshell.